The hungry howl rips through the primordial night. It's not the wind, nor the predator lurking in the savanna's shadows. It's the lament of Kale, a female Homo Habilis, and her clan, huddled beneath the cold carcass of an antelope. The scent of fresh blood mingles with that of fear. The crude, trembling spear in her hands no longer points at prey, but at the dark horizon from where the true danger arises. Not tooth and claw, but the incessant hunger that gnaws at the soul, forcing brutal choices, unearthing the deepest savagery. The golden age had not yet arrived, and tomorrow was just another day to die. The rising sun painted the distant mountains a rusty orange, but for Kale and her small clan, the light brought only the promise of another battle for survival. The heavy, humid air of the early morning African savanna was impregnated with the acrid smell of damp earth and the sickly sweetness of distant carcasses. The vast plains stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with thorny acacias and dried-up bushes, beneath a sky of such a deep blue it seemed almost black. Every dancing shadow, every whisper of the wind through the tall grass was a potential threat. The world 6.4 million years in the past was a cruel theater where life and death danced in a primitive, incessant ballet. Cal's stomach rumbled in protest, an echo of the emptiness she felt in her heart. Her skin, tanned by the sun and harsh weather, her muscles tense from constant vigilance, betrayed a life of deprivation. She crouched near the remains of a dying fire, its bitter smoke mingling with the morning dew. The whitened bones of a small rodent lay beside her, a grim reminder of their last satisfying meal days ago. Her almond-shaped eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon for any sign of food, any hope. Beside her, her younger brother Daro shivered with cold and hunger, nestled in a pile of furs. Fever consumed him, and his wheezing breath was a melody of agony. Kale, water. Daro's voice was a faint, almost inaudible whisper. Kale turned, anguish clutching her chest. The small puddle of water near the camp was almost dry, and what remained was muddy and infested with larvae. They needed to find a river, a stream, any source of life before dehydration claimed Daro. The problem was that the nearest river was in the direction of the Valley of Shadows, a feared place infested with predators and rival clans. But the choice was not an option. The clan leader, Baro, a male of robust build and hardened demeanor, drew Kale's attention with a deep grunt. His eyes, as ancient as the mountains, revealed the same hopelessness Kale felt. The hunt was in vain, Kale. The buffalo are gone. The rhinos, too many. Kale nodded, her gaze fixed on Daro's frail figure. We need water, Burrow, for Daro, for all of us. Baro hesitated, his eyes shifting to the vast expanse of the savanna. The Valley of Shadows, it is dangerous. The Big Feet patrol its edges. The Big Feet, a rival clan of Paranthropus boisei, were known for their brutality and their dominance over the fertile lands. They were larger, stronger, and did not hesitate to attack anyone who invaded their territory. Kale felt a chill run down her spine. The law of the savanna was simple. The weak perished. You won't last, Burrow. None of us will, if we don't find water soon. I will go. Kale's voice was firm, charged with a determination that bordered on recklessness. Burrow watched her for a long moment, assessing the spark of courage in her eyes. He knew Kale was fearless, a born hunter, even in her youth. Go with Kanawa and Rikan. Be cautious. If you encounter the Big Feet, flee. There is no glory in pointless death. Kale agreed. She picked up her rudimentary spear, made from a sharpened, fire-tempered branch and a handful of chipped stones. The smell of damp earth mingled with the pungent odor of sweat and fear. The air was thick with unseen threat. She looked at Daro one last time, her heart tightening at the sight of his fragility. The fate of her brother, and perhaps the entire clan, now depended on this desperate journey. They set off, three tiny figures against the relentless vastness of the savanna, walking towards the unknown and the grim promise of the Valley of Shadows. The horizon seemed to swallow the light, engulfing them in its imminent darkness. The journey to the Valley of Shadows was an ordeal. The relentless morning sun of Africa scorched their skin, and thirst was a sharp knife in their throats. The smell of dry grass and dust choked them, and the air vibrated with the incessant hum of insects and the distant cry of birds of prey, omens of death. Kale, Kanawha, and Rekan moved in silence, their senses sharpened, every step calculated. The sounds of the savanna were an orchestra of danger. The rustling of leaves, the cracking of branches, the grinding of stones beneath bare feet. Everything could mean the presence of a predator or a rival. Kanawha, an experienced hunter of few words, followed Kale closely, his eyes sweeping the landscape with a falcon's precision. Rekan, the youngest and most agile of the trio, kept to the rear, his spear ready. The tension was palpable, a constant prickle on the back of their necks. The valley emerged like a scar on the landscape, a deep fissure in the earth, covered by denser, darker vegetation. The smell of water, faint at first, grew stronger, mixed with the sweet, rancid odor of moss and decomposition. As they drew closer, Kale felt her heart quicken. The environment had changed. The trees became more imposing, their dense canopies blocking out the sunlight, transforming the valley's entrance into perpetual twilight. The sounds intensified. The murmur of a stream, the melancholic song of unknown birds, and, more disturbingly, the distant howl of hyenas, a sign that predators were nearby. The ground was damp and soft, covered with decaying leaves, and the smell of damp earth and wildlife was almost overwhelming. Suddenly, Kanawha stopped, raising his hand. His eyes widened, fixed on something ahead. "Smell of blood," he whispered, his voice tense. Kale felt a chill run down her spine. The smell was unmistakable, metallic and intense, mixed with the rancid smell of rotting meat. They approached cautiously, every nerve on alert. The stream meandered through the trees, and the sight that presented itself was disturbing. A large, wounded buffalo lay dying on the bank. Its front legs were tangled in a crude vine trap, and one of its flanks was torn open, revealing a deep wound. The smell of fresh blood was strong, and flies buzzed around the carcass. "A big feet trap?" Rekan murmured, his voice full of caution. "They are nearby." Kale nodded, her eyes sweeping the area. The trap was simple but effective, and the fact that the buffalo was still alive meant they had just left it there, perhaps waiting for the animal to exhaust itself. It was an opportunity for life, but also an imminent danger. The buffalo was enormous, strong, and its meat could feed the clan for days. But they could not risk a direct confrontation with the big feet. "What do we do, Kale?" Kanawha asked, his voice hoarse. The hunger in his eyes was as palpable as the thirst. Kale pondered. They needed water for Darrow, and the stream was the answer. The buffalo meat was a unique chance to satisfy the hunger that tormented them all. But the risk... She closed her eyes for an instant, Darrow's face in her mind. The image of her weak, sick brother spurred her on. "We need the water first," she decided, her voice firm. "Rekan, stand guard. Kanawha and I will get the water." As Kanawha and Kale approached the stream, the buffalo let out a groan of pain that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. With each step, the feeling of being watched intensified. The smell of smoke, faint at first, began to mix with the smell of blood. Cal's heart pounded against her ribs. They were being hunted. Suddenly, the sound of breaking branches echoed through the forest. A sharp cry from Rekan cut through the air. "Big feet!" He yelled, his voice filled with terror. Kale turned, her spear raised. A massive, muscular figure emerged from the trees, followed by others. Their bodies were robust, covered in thick fur, and their faces were brutish and menacing. They wielded primitive clubs and sharp stones. The sight was terrifying. The leader, A huge male with a nasty scar on his face let out a guttural roar, his eyes fixed on their prey, not the buffalo, but them. The hunt had turned. Hunger and despair mingled in the air, and Cale knew that the fight would be for their lives. The roar of the big feet leader echoed through the forest, a guttural sound that seemed to shake the very trees. The smell of sweat and damp earth, previously just a component of the environment, now mixed with the metallic odor of fear. Cale felt the cold lash of adrenaline, the fight-or-flight instinct screaming in every fiber of her being. Rakan, pale and wide-eyed, stumbled backward, his spear falling to the damp ground. Kanawa, more experienced, gripped his weapon firmly, but the apprehension on his face was evident. The big feet advanced, a sea of muscle and rage, their massive bodies moving with surprising agility for their size. The leader's club whistled through the air as he swung it in a deadly arc towards Arkan. Cale acted on pure instinct. With a guttural cry, she shoved Rakan out of the way, the club passing inches from his head, feeling the displaced wind. The forest became a blur of movement and shouts. The sound of stones hitting stones, the hiss of spears through the air, and the grunt of pain mingled in a brutal cacophony. Cale dodged a blow, the side of her head buzzing from the impact of a paranthropus's club. She spun, her spear piercing the aggressor's thigh. A cry of pain echoed, and the big foot staggered backward, giving Cale time to retreat. Kanawa fought bravely against two attackers, his agility his only advantage against their brute force. Rakan, recovering from the shock, picked up his spear and tried to help, but his inexperience was visible. The smell of blood, previously belonging only to the wounded buffalo, now intensified with the bloodshed from both sides. Cale tasted the bitter tang of iron in her mouth, her breath ragged. Her muscles burned. She saw the big feet leader advance again, his eyes bloodshot. He was a relentless predator, and defeat was not an option for him. "Run! To the river!" Cale shouted, her voice hoarse, desperately trying to guide her companions. She knew the stream was their only chance to escape the massacre. The water was deep enough to hinder the big feet's advance, as they were not as adapted to aquatic environments. But the leader was determined not to let them escape. He attacked her with renewed fury, his club swinging at a relentless pace. Cale defended herself with her spear, parrying blows and looking for an opening. The clash was brutal, every blow aimed at life. Suddenly, Cale saw an opportunity. The leader, in his blind fury, exposed his flank for an instant. Cale, with surprising speed, threw her spear with force. The sharp point penetrated the paranthropus's flesh, eliciting a roar of pain and rage. He staggered backward, the spear embedded in his body, bleeding profusely. But Cale's relief was short-lived. Other big feet were approaching, and the leader, despite his injury, was still a threat. Kanawa and Rakan had managed to move away, but were cornered near the stream. "Jump! Jump in the water!" Cale shouted, her voice echoing through the forest. With the spear still lodged in the leader, Cale used the moment of hesitation to run towards the stream. The big feet, reluctant to enter the water, hesitated at the bank. Cale plunged into the cold, muddy water, feeling the shock on her skin. Kanawa and Rakan followed her, swimming desperately to the other bank. The big feet leader, with a roar of hatred, ripped the spear from his body, his gaze fixed on Cale. The river current was strong, and Cale struggled to keep her head above water, her muscles tired from the fight. The smell of mud and fresh water filled her nostrils. She looked back. The bleeding leader pointed at them with his club, giving orders to his subordinates. They would not follow them into the water, but the fury in his eyes promised that the pursuit would not end there. As Cale, Kanawa, and Rakan emerged exhausted on the other bank, the sound of the big feet retreating mingled with the lament of the wounded buffalo still agonizing on the opposite bank. Hunger began to gnaw again, and the water, though it had saved them, would not solve the food problem. The river, which had given them refuge, was now a wall between them and the only source of meat. And the smell of blood. It lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the violence that surrounded them. Night was falling fast, and the cold promised to be even crueler than the thirst. Night swallowed the savanna, bringing with it a blanket of darkness and a cold that pierced to the bone. The smell of damp earth intensified, mixing with the pungent aroma of decaying vegetation from the riverbank. The sounds of the nocturnal forest were a tapestry of laments and whispers. The distant croaking of frogs, the buzzing of night insects, the rustling of leaves with the movement of invisible creatures. Every sound was amplified by the oppressive silence of solitude. Kale, Kanawa, and Rikan were huddled beneath the canopy of a giant tree, their bodies trembling from cold and exhaustion. The river water had washed away the grime of the fight, but not the weariness. Hunger, a constant and painful presence, clutched at their stomachs. The thought of the buffalo, with its abundant meat, was torture. They had escaped the big feat, but at a terrible cost. The loss of a vital meal for the clan's survival. "Daro, he won't last without fresh water," Rakan murmured, his voice weak and full of guilt for stumbling in the fight. His young eyes, once full of life, now carried the weight of despair. Kale knew this. The stream water was crucial. They had managed to hydrate a little, but there was no way to carry enough for the entire clan without a container. And the furs they would normally use for this had been left behind in their escape. Kinawa, his eyes fixed on the darkness on the other side of the river, which was now an indistinct blur of trees, spoke. "We need meat, Kale. We cannot return empty-handed. The clan will perish." His voice was grave, but there was no reproach, only the harsh reality of survival. Kale closed her eyes, the night's cold clutching her chest. The decision weighed heavily on her. Returning to the camp without meat, with Daro dying, was almost as unthinkable as facing the big feet again. But crossing the river meant risk. And the buffalo? It wouldn't be there forever. Other predators would be drawn by the smell of blood. Suddenly, a distinct sound broke the night silence, a deep guttural howl that made the ground tremble. A pack of hyenas. The smell of carrion intensified, mixing with the smell of animal urine and damp earth. They were approaching the buffalo, drawn by its scent. It was a race against time. If the hyenas got there first, the chance of getting meat would be minimal. Kale stood up, her decision made. The survival instinct, the primordial fury, overcame the fear. "We will go back." For the buffalo, Kanawa and Rakam looked at her, surprised. "But the big feet," Rakam began. "The hyenas will get there first," Kale interrupted him, her voice low but charged with fierce determination. "We need the meat. It's the clan's only chance. If we don't go now, we'll have nothing." Kale knew the plan was risky, bordering on madness. Crossing the river again in the dark, facing the hyenas and possibly the big feet who might still be nearby. But there was no other option. The river was a portal to life, and the buffalo meat, even if shared, was their only hope. The decision was an act of desperation and courage. Kale guided her companions back to the riverbank. The current seemed stronger in the dark, and the water was even colder. The smell of mud and fresh water filled their nostrils, mingling with the smell of fear as they plunged back into the dark waters. The cold penetrated their bones, but the adrenaline kept them moving. As they emerged exhausted on the other bank, the sound of the hyenas was closer, their howls echoing sinisterly through the forest. The smell of carrion was strong, almost nauseating. The weak, pale moonlight barely penetrated the tree canopies, creating ghostly shadows that danced around them. They moved furtively, their footsteps almost inaudible. Kale could feel the presence of the hyenas, their slender bodies moving in the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. The stage was set for a brutal confrontation. Hunger, thirst, and the threat of predators merged into a single, terrible challenge. and time was running out. The smell of carrion and the blood-curdling howl of the hyenas guided Kale, Kinawa, and Rikan through the dense darkness of the forest. The air was heavy with the putrid odor of decomposition, a smell that mixed the sweetness of death with the acidity of wild animal saliva. The moonlight barely penetrated the tree canopies, transforming the landscape into a labyrinth of distorted shadows, where every bush and every rock seemed to conceal a threat. The sounds of the night, the distant croaking of frogs, the buzzing of nocturnal insects, the snapping of branches under invisible feet, were amplified by the tension, turning the forest into a scene of primordial horror. As they approached the buffalo carcass, the scene was one of pure chaos and savagery. A pack of hyenas, their slender bodies and gleaming eyes visible in the darkness, tore at the animal's flesh. The sound of bones being crunched and the low, guttural growl of the beasts were maddening. The smell of fresh blood and entrails was overwhelming, mixing with the strong odor of their own species emanating from the animals. Kale felt a knot in her throat. Hyenas were opportunistic predators, relentless and brutal in a group. Facing them in their feeding frenzy was a high-risk gamble. But the hunger in their own stomachs was a sharper pain than any fear. "There are too many of them," Rikan whispered, his voice trembling. "But they are distracted," Kale responded, her voice low and firm, despite her heart pounding against her chest. She pointed to the carcass. "We will scare them." Kinawa from the flank, Rikan covered the rear. The strategy was simple: a surprise attack, noisy and aggressive enough to scare the hyenas away from the carcass. With a guttural war cry, Kale ran towards the pack, brandishing her crude spear. Kinawa followed her, and Rikan, despite his fear, also advanced, letting out a piercing cry. The hyenas, caught by surprise, recoiled for an instant, their eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and irritation. They growled, showing sharp teeth, but the human determination was something new to them. The smell of sweat and adrenaline mixed with that of the prey, creating an olfactory confusion. One of the hyenas, larger and bolder, advanced on Kale, its growls intensifying. Kale dodged, her spear cutting through the air, narrowly missing the beast's neck. The fight was chaotic and brutal. Kale defended herself with her spear, pushing the hyenas away from the carcass. Kinawa, with his agility, managed to evade attacks, while Rikan, despite his inexperience, used stones to fend off the animals. The smell of hyena saliva and wet fur was almost unbearable. The hyenas' howls were deafening, a chorus of rage and hunger. The sound of their teeth scraping on the buffalo carcass was a constant reminder of time running out. Suddenly, Kale felt an impact on her leg. A smaller hyena, coming from the shadows, had bitten her calf. The pain was excruciating, a sharp stab that made her stagger. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She let out a cry of fury and rage, kicking the hyena with all her might, driving it away. The wound bled, and the smell of Kale's own blood attracted even more of the beasts. "Get the meat, quickly!" Kale shouted, her voice choked with pain, but the urgency in her eyes was clear. Kinawa and Rikan, seeing Kale's injury, acted with renewed vigor. They rushed to cut pieces of meat from the buffalo, using their improvised stone knives. The sound of the carcass being dismembered mingled with the hyena's growls. The smell of fresh meat mixed with the rancidness of sweat and fear. The hyenas, still reluctant to face the humans directly, began to retreat, but not without casting looks of hatred and frustration. They knew the prey was rightfully theirs. Kale, with her bleeding leg, remained standing, her spear pointed at what remained of the pack. The air was impregnated with the tension of the recently ended battle. When Kinawa and Rikan had managed to cut enough pieces of meat, wrapping them in large leaves, Kale felt relief wash over her, mixed with the throbbing pain in her leg. They had succeeded. The meat meant life for the clan. But the fight had been brutal, and Kale's wound was a grim reminder of the price they paid. As they moved away, the sound of the hyenas returning to the carcass and the chewing of bones echoed in the darkness, a macabre melody. The threat of the big feat still loomed, and the journey back to the clan would be long and dangerous, with Darrow's fragility on their minds and Cal's blood marking the path. The night was still young, and the dangers of the primordial world were far from over. The journey back was an agony. Cal's leg throbbed with every step, blood oozing and mixing with mud and earth, leaving a subtle trail on the damp forest floor. The metallic smell of blood, now on her own flesh, was a constant reminder of the battle won. The pre-dawn cold was biting, and the silence of the forest, which had previously been a canvas for the sounds of the night, now seemed to amplify the pain and exhaustion. The pieces of meat, though heavy, were a blessed burden, exuding a scent of life and hope amidst the despair. Kanawa and Rikan, though exhausted, supported Kale, one on each side, offering silent and vital support. With each rest stop, Kale felt the fever begin to rise, an internal heat that contrasted with the external cold. The fear of infection, that the hyena bite could be fatal, was a constant shadow in her mind. The pale moonlight was already beginning to give way to the first rays of sun, which timidly filtered through the tree canopies, painting the horizon in shades of gray and pink. Finally, just as the sun was about to fully emerge, the smell of campfire smoke and the faint aroma of human bodies reached Cal's nostrils. The relief was overwhelming, mixing with the tears she didn't know she was holding back. The camp. They had arrived. The clan was gathered around the dying fire, their faces pale and drawn from hunger and worry. Burrow, the leader, sat, his countenance filled with despair. The sight of Darrow, even weaker, coughing and trembling, tightened Cal's heart. He was on the verge of death. When Cal's small group emerged from the forest shadows, a murmur of astonishment and relief spread through the clan. Hungry eyes widened at the sight of the meat Kinawa and Rakan carried. The smell of fresh meat was a balm to their empty stomachs, a ray of hope amidst the darkness. Burrow stood up, his eyes fixed on Cal's bleeding leg. "You did it, Cal," he said, his voice hoarse, filled with a mix of admiration and relief. Cal merely nodded, exhausted. The smell of fear and despair began to subside, replaced by the scent of gratitude and life. The meat was distributed quickly, and the hungry clan devoured each piece with a voracity that bordered on savagery. Cal, even with the pain, felt immense relief seeing Darrow drink the water they had brought and, with the help of a tiny piece of minced meat, feel some strength return to his frail body. Cal's wounds were cleaned and covered with chewed herbs, a bitter balm that somewhat eased the pain. The sweet, earthy smell of the herbs mixed with the scent of dried blood. As she watched her clan eat, observing the previously somber faces light up with a spark of hope, Cal understood the true nature of survival. It wasn't just about strength, but about instinct, courage, and the ability to adapt, to fight for every piece of life. Cal's journey had revealed the cruel origin of human instinct, the hunger that drives, the blood that is shed, and the bones left behind, marking the path of evolution. What they had found in the Valley of Shadows was not just food and water, but a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human in a brutal world. The mystery of tomorrow remained, but for now, they had survived. And with each new day, the story of humanity would continue to be written, a story of hunger, blood, and bones, but also of indomitable courage,